It was a rainy afternoon in the quiet village of Hemsley when young Thomas Bell stepped into the old clockmaker's shop at the corner of Willow Street. The tiny bell above the door gave a soft chime as he entered, its delicate sound oddly soothing amidst the storm outside. The shop was dimly lit, with shelves lined in clocks of all shapes and sizes, grandfather clocks, cuckoo clocks, mantel clocks, all ticking in a strangely harmonious rhythm. It smelled of oil, brass, and old wood. Behind the counter sat Mr. Whitaker, the elderly clockmaker, hunched over a small pocket watch with his magnifying glasses balanced on the tip of his nose. Thomas, a curious university student on break, had always passed the shop but never dared enter. Today, driven by boredom and the lure of shelter from the rain, he finally did. "Good afternoon," Thomas greeted politely. Mr. Whitaker looked up slowly, his wrinkled face stretching into a faint smile. "Good afternoon, young man. Looking for something in particular?" "Just browsing, really." "I've always admired your clocks," Thomas said, his eyes scanning the walls. Whitaker nodded. "They all have their own stories, you know. Some are more interesting than others." Just then, the door creaked open again. A man in a dark trench coat and wide-brimmed hat stepped in, dripping wet. He moved with purpose, glancing around until his eyes met Mr. Whitaker's. There was a flicker of recognition, though neither of them said a word. "May I help you?" Mr. Whitaker asked, his tone a little less friendly. The man reached into his coat and pulled out an old, tarnished clock. It was small, round, with Roman numerals and no hands. "This belonged to my grandfather," the stranger said. "I was told you're the only one who can repair it." Mr. Whitaker stared at the clock for a moment, then took it gently, almost reverently. "I haven't seen this in decades." Thomas watched quietly, intrigued. "Leave it with me," the clockmaker said at last. "Come back in a week." The man nodded, tipping his hat, and left without another word. When the door shut behind him, the room seemed to fall still, as if the clocks themselves were holding their breath. Thomas hesitated, then asked, "What's the story behind that one?" Mr. Whitaker didn't answer right away. He turned the small clock in his hands, eyes distant. Finally, he said in a whisper, "That clock hasn't ticked since 1942, and if it does again, something buried long ago may come to light." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. Outside, the rain tapped harder on the windows. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. The image of the mysterious man and the strange clock without hands lingered in his thoughts like a ghost in the corner of his mind. What did Mr. Whitaker mean by something buried long ago? It wasn't just a poetic phrase. There had been weight behind his words. The following afternoon, Thomas returned to the shop under the pretense of browsing again. The doorbell chimed softly as he stepped inside. Mr. Whitaker looked up but didn't seem surprised to see him. "You're curious," the old man said. "Not as a question, but as a statement." Thomas nodded sheepishly. "I couldn't stop thinking about that clock." Mr. Whitaker sighed and gestured for him to come behind the counter. "You seem like someone who can keep a secret." "I can," Thomas replied, voice steady. Whitaker opened a drawer beneath his workbench and pulled out a faded leather journal. The cover was cracked and the pages yellowed with age. He set it on the table and opened to a marked page. In 1942, during the war, Mr. Whitaker began, "I was just an apprentice. My master, Edmund Caldwell, was the original owner of that clock. He was a clever man. Brilliant, really, but he kept secrets." Thomas leaned closer, drawn in. One day, Whitaker continued, a young soldier came in with a message. It was all very hush-hush. He brought this exact clock and said it had to be altered to carry something. I never knew what. I only helped remove the hands and seal something inside the case. "What kind of something?" Thomas asked. Mr. Whitaker looked around cautiously, then tapped the journal. Caldwell later wrote that the clock contained the location of a cache, hidden gold he believed smuggled from occupied Europe, a fortune that was never claimed. Thomas raised his eyebrows. "And you never tried to open it?" "I was warned not to," the clockmaker said. "And honestly, I was too afraid. There were whispers back then, men who disappeared after asking too many questions." He opened the back of the clock, revealing intricate gears and a tiny sealed compartment, no bigger than a matchbox. He hadn't opened it yet. The wax seal remained intact, marked with a symbol Thomas didn't recognize, a triangle with a snake inside. Mr. Whitaker looked at him solemnly. "The man who brought this in yesterday? I believe he's the grandson of that soldier. And if he's come now, after all these years, something's happening." Thomas stared at the strange seal, his heart beating a little faster. "What are you going to do?" he asked. Mr. Whitaker closed the clock gently. If I open it, I might discover the truth. But I might also uncover something that was meant to stay hidden. For the first time, Thomas realized this was no ordinary story. This was a puzzle buried in time, a mystery begging to be solved. And he was already part of it. The next morning, the skies over Hemsley had cleared, though a cool mist still hung over the village streets. Thomas arrived at the clockmaker's shop earlier than usual, eager to find out whether Mr. Whitaker had dared to open the sealed compartment. As he stepped inside, he noticed the shutters were still drawn and the lights dimmed. Mr. Whitaker sat at the workbench, hunched over the mysterious clock, his face drawn and pale. "I couldn't sleep," the old man said without looking up. "I opened it." Thomas approached cautiously. "What did you find?" Mr. Whitaker turned and held up a small, square piece of brass, thinner than a coin, with finely etched writing on one side. It shimmered faintly in the lamplight. "It's not gold," he said, "but it may be more valuable." Thomas leaned in, squinting at the inscription. The engraving was in code, a sequence of letters and numbers arranged in what looked like nonsense. At the bottom was a set of coordinates. "It's a cipher," Thomas whispered. "A puzzle." Mr. Whitaker nodded. "I believe it's a message pointing to the location of the cache, but we'll need to decode it." He handed the brass piece to Thomas. As Thomas turned it over, something curious happened. He noticed faint lines beneath the code. Holding it up to the light, he saw a second layer etched faintly into the metal, like a watermark. "There's more here," he said, "hidden text." Mr. Whitaker fetched a magnifying glass. Together, they deciphered a single phrase hidden in the lower corner. "Follow the chimes of St. Agnes." "St. Agnes," Thomas muttered. "That's a church, isn't it?" Whitaker nodded. "It's on the edge of the village, abandoned for years." Thomas stared at the coordinates again. "I think this is leading us there." Mr. Whitaker hesitated. "If this really does lead to the cache, it's been untouched for over 80 years. But someone else is after it now. That man who came yesterday, he won't wait long." Just then, the bell above the door jingled. They both turned sharply. A tall woman in a navy trench coat stood in the doorway, her eyes sharp and calculating. She gave them a tight smile. "I'm looking for something that may have been left here recently," she said smoothly. "A family heirloom, perhaps you've seen it?" Thomas and Mr. Whitaker exchanged a glance. It was clear she wasn't here for a clock. "I'm afraid we don't have anything matching that description," Whitaker replied calmly. The woman's gaze lingered on the workbench for a beat too long, then nodded once. "Well then, if you happen to find anything of interest, do let me know. Time is ticking, after all." She left as quickly as she'd arrived. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Thomas turned to Mr. Whitaker. "We have to go to St. Agnes, tonight." The clockmaker looked down at the cipher again and nodded. "Then we'd better be quick, before someone else gets there first." That night, under the cover of darkness, Thomas and Mr. Whitaker set off towards the edge of the village. The air was cold and damp, with only the moonlight to guide their way. St. Agnes Church stood in eerie silence, its stone tower partially covered in ivy, its bell long unused. Thomas held a torch in one hand and the cipher in the other. "Are you sure this is the place?" Mr. Whitaker nodded. The message was clear. "Follow the chimes of St. Agnes." "I don't think it was meant literally. I think it refers to the old bell mechanism." They pushed open the heavy wooden doors. Inside, the church smelled of damp stone and dust. Pews stood crooked, some collapsed, and the stained glass windows were cracked and broken. The two moved carefully through the nave towards the back of the church, where a narrow staircase led up to the bell tower. As they ascended, the air grew colder. At the top, they found the great iron bell, long silent, suspended above a wooden floor. Beneath it was the mechanism that had once controlled the chimes: gears, pulleys, and a panel with numbered slots. Thomas pulled out the cipher. "I think the numbers here correspond to positions on this panel," he said, examining it closely. The brass plate bore a sequence, D4, A2, G6, E1. Carefully, he pressed each of the matching levers. At the final one, there was a soft click, and a panel in the floor opened slightly. They exchanged a glance. Mr. Whitaker crouched and pulled open the trapdoor. Beneath it, in the hollow of the tower floor, was a small metal chest, old, rusted, but still sealed tight. He lifted it carefully and set it down. "I never thought I'd see this," he whispered. Thomas opened the latch slowly. Inside, they found bundles of aged documents, some sealed with wax, and several small velvet pouches filled with what looked like old European coins: gold, silver, even platinum. Smuggled out during the war, Mr. Whitaker murmured, to keep it from falling into enemy hands. There was also a photograph, worn but intact. It showed Edmund Caldwell and the soldier who'd first brought the clock. Behind them, barely visible, was a third man, a shadowy figure with piercing eyes. Thomas turned the photo over. In faded ink were the words, "If found, protect it. Trust no one." A sudden noise from below made them freeze. Footsteps. Then a voice echoed up the tower, "You shouldn't have come here." It was the woman from earlier. Thomas quickly shut the chest and whispered, "We need to get out, now." But there was only one way down. Mr. Whitaker turned to the far side of the bell tower and pointed to a narrow hatch. Through the maintenance ladder, quickly. Thomas climbed through first, clutching the chest with Mr. Whitaker close behind. Below, the woman's footsteps grew louder. The race was on. The old ladder creaked with every movement, but Thomas didn't dare slow down. The narrow shaft led them out through a crumbling side door of the church, hidden beneath thick vines and fallen stone. The moment they reached the overgrown graveyard outside, Mr. Whitaker sealed the door shut with an old iron latch. "Come," he whispered, "this way." They slipped through the headstones, hearts pounding as the first drops of rain began to fall. Behind them, the bell tower's silhouette loomed in the darkness, and within it, someone hunting them. They reached the tree line and disappeared into the woods. Only once they were a safe distance away did they stop to catch their breath. Thomas placed the metal chest on a mossy log, his hands shaking slightly. "What now?" he asked. Mr. Whitaker took a moment before replying. "We can't take this to the authorities, not yet. The documents alone could change history. Some of these papers are intelligence reports, maybe even identities that were protected during the war." "And the coins?" Thomas asked. "They belong in a museum or perhaps returned to the families they were taken from. But if we're not careful, someone will make sure they disappear again." Thomas sat down beside the chest. "That woman, she wasn't working alone, was she?" "No," Mr. Whitaker said grimly. "I suspect she's part of a group that's been searching for this for decades. They know what it means, and they'll come again." Thomas looked at the brass cipher still clutched in his hand. A small part of him felt proud that he'd helped uncover something that had remained hidden for over 80 years. But he also felt the weight of it. "Do you regret opening the clock?" he asked quietly. Mr. Whitaker looked out over the village, its rooftops glistening in the moonlight. "No," he said, "time always reveals the truth. Eventually, they decided to hide the chest until they could find someone they truly trusted, an historian or archivist who could help preserve the materials properly. It was too important to fall into the wrong hands." As dawn broke, the two returned to the village, both changed by what they had discovered. Later that day, the shop reopened as usual. Clocks ticked calmly on the walls, oblivious to the mystery that had just unfolded. The woman never returned. But Thomas began visiting more often, and under Mr. Whitaker's guidance, he began learning the art of clockmaking himself. Not just for the craft, but for what clocks truly represented: time, memory, and hidden stories waiting to be heard. One day, Mr. Whitaker handed him a new brass plate, blank and shining. "For your first piece," he said with a smile, "make something worth remembering." Thomas nodded, taking it with quiet reverence. He would. After all, time, like truth, always ticks on. The end.